In the earliest centuries of the Imperium, when memory and myth still walked side by side, there existed a time when humanity looked outward not with fear, but with certainty. It was an age when the stars themselves seemed within reach, when the long isolation of old night had finally begun to loosen its grip upon the scattered worlds of mankind. Across the silent gulfs, human civilizations had endured in solitude for thousands of years, each one shaped by its own struggles, its own triumphs, and its own quiet decline. Many had forgotten Terra entirely. Others remembered it only as a half-believed origin, a distant cradle buried beneath the dust of uncounted generations. And yet Terra endured. At the center of humanity's rebirth stood the Emperor. He did not arrive with the suddenness of a conqueror, nor with the urgency of one who feared time slipping away. His presence was something older, something inevitable, as though he had always been waiting for the moment when humanity was ready to rise again. His authority did not rely upon proclamation alone. It existed in the certainty of his actions, in the quiet, relentless reshaping of a broken world. Terra, once fractured by endless war and division, had been unified beneath his will. The techno-barbarian kings who had ruled over wastelands of rust and bone had fallen into history. In their place rose the foundations of something new. Not merely a nation, nor even a single world united, but the beginning of an empire that would stretch across the stars. This was the birth of the Great Crusade. It did not begin with spectacle. There was no single moment when the galaxy itself seemed to tremble. Instead, it began as a steady expansion, a deliberate reaching outward into the unknown. Fleets of newly forged vessels departed from Terra and Luna, their hulls bearing the sigils of unity, their holds filled with warriors, explorers, and emissaries. Each ship carried with it more than soldiers. It carried purpose. The void, once a barrier that had isolated humanity, was now a road. Through ancient technologies reclaimed and new methods refined, the Imperium learned once more to navigate the hidden currents beneath reality itself. Passage between stars, though never without risk, became possible on a scale not seen since humanity's forgotten golden age. World by world, system by system, the Imperium extended its reach. Some planets welcomed the arrival of Terra's fleets. Their populations, long isolated and vulnerable, saw in the Imperium the promise of protection and reconnect Ion. These worlds joined willingly, their banners lowered not in defeat, but in recognition. Others resisted. On those worlds, the Great Crusade revealed its other face. War, when it came, was swift and absolute. The Imperium did not wage war for conquest alone, but for unity, and unity permitted no division. Armies descended from orbit in disciplined waves, their advance guided by strategies calculated long before the first shot was fired. Resistance, no matter how fierce, could not endure indefinitely against such precision. Yet even in war, there existed a sense of inevitability rather than cruelty. The Imperium did not see itself as a destroyer, but as a restorer. Across the expanding frontier, the Emperor's presence was rarely witnessed directly. He did not stand upon every battlefield, nor did he speak to every newly compliant world. Instead, his will moved through intermediaries, through commanders and generals whose authority derived entirely from him. Among these figures were beings who stood apart from all others. They were not merely leaders. They were something greater. Forged through means that few could comprehend, they carried within them the Emperor's design in its purest form. Each one embodied an aspect of his vision, expressed not in words, but in action. They walked among ordinary soldiers as distant giants, their presence both inspiring and unsettling. To look upon one was to witness humanity made more than human. Where they led, victory followed. The armies of the Imperium advanced with a confidence that bordered upon certainty. They had known the darkness of isolation. They had seen the cost of division. Now, united beneath a single purpose, they believed themselves unstoppable. Across the fleets, among the countless soldiers who would never stand in the Emperor's presence, faith in his vision became a quiet constant. They did not question the direction of the crusade. They did not question its necessity. They believed. In the void between stars, the Imperium's vessels traveled in vast formations, their engines burning with steady brilliance. Within their hulls, generations of warriors lived and died, their lives measured not in years, but in campaigns. To them, the crusade was not an event, but a reality as permanent as the stars themselves. Some would never see Terra. Some had never known any world but the decks of their ships. And yet they understood their purpose. They were the hands of something greater than themselves. Far above them all, beyond the reach of ordinary perception, the Emperor watched. His attention was not limited to a single fleet or a single war. His vision encompassed the entirety of humanity's future. He saw not only what was, but what might yet be. Every decision, every campaign, every world brought into compliance was a step toward a destination only he fully understood. He did not explain this destination. He did not need to. Those who served him trusted in its existence. On distant worlds newly brought into the Imperium, the first changes were often subtle. Symbols appeared where none had existed before. New structures rose beside ancient ones. The languages of isolated cultures began to shift, shaped by contact with a wider Imperium. Over time, these worlds became part of something larger than themselves. They were no longer alone. For the first time in uncounted millennia, humanity was becoming whole again. And in this age of expansion, there was no sign of an ending. Each victory led to another horizon. Each horizon revealed new stars waiting to be claimed. The crusade moved forward with a quiet momentum of inevitability, driven by a certainty that seemed unshakable. Yet beneath this certainty, beyond the reach of fleets and armies, there remained truths that few could see. The galaxy was vast. Its silence was not always empty. There were forces older than humanity's memory, watching as the Imperium spread outward from its ancient cradle. They did not announce themselves. They did not interfere. Not yet. But their presence lingered, like distant thunder beyond the edge of hearing. Still, the Imperium advanced. Its banners carried into the darkness, its purpose unbroken, and at the center of it all, distant and enduring, the Emperor remained upon Terra, guiding the destiny of his species with a patience that seemed beyond time itself. In those early years, there was confidence, there was unity, there was belief that the future belonged entirely to mankind. And as the fleets continued their silent passage between the stars, and as countless worlds felt the first touch of reunion, there existed the quiet sense that this was only the beginning of a story far greater than any single victory. In the earliest centuries of the Imperium, carried forward in the steady light of still moving side by side, there existed a time when humanity looked outward longer than any living soul could comprehend. It was an age when the stars themselves seemed within reach, as the Imperium long isolation of old night had finally begun to loosen its grip upon the scattered worlds of mankind, as aware that something extraordinary across the silent gulfs, and that in time human civilizations had endured in solitude for thousands of fate of humanity, each one shaped by its own struggles. For now, there was only its own quiet decline. Only the stars. Many had forgotten and the long, entirely. Patient others remembered it only as a half-believed origin, a distant cradle buried beneath the dust of uncounted generations. And yet Terra endured. At the center of humanity's rebirth stood the Emperor. He did not arrive with the suddenness of a conqueror, nor with the urgency of one who feared time slipping away. His presence was something older, something inevitable, as though he had always been waiting for the moment when humanity was ready to rise again. His authority did not rely upon proclamation alone. It existed in the certainty of his actions, in the quiet, relentless reshaping of a broken world. Terra, once fractured by endless war and division, had been unified beneath his will. The techno-barbarian kings who had ruled over wastelands of rust and bone had fallen into history. In their place rose the foundations of something new. Not merely a nation, nor even a single world united, but the beginning of an empire that would stretch across the stars. This was the birth of the Great Crusade. It did not begin with spectacle. There was no single moment when the galaxy itself seemed to tremble. Instead, it began as a steady expansion, a deliberate reaching outward into the unknown. Fleets of newly forged vessels departed from Terra and Luna, their hulls bearing the sigils of unity, their holds filled with warriors, explorers, and emissaries. Each ship carried with it more than soldiers. It carried purpose. The void, once a barrier that had isolated humanity, was now a road. Through ancient technologies reclaimed and new methods refined, the Imperium learned once more to navigate the hidden currents beneath reality itself. Passage between stars, though never without risk, became possible on a scale not seen since humanity's forgotten golden age. World by world, system by system, the Imperium extended its reach. Some planets welcomed the arrival of Terra's fleets. Their populations, long isolated and vulnerable, saw in the Imperium the promise of protection and reconnect Ion. These worlds joined willingly, their banners lowered not in defeat, but in recognition. Others resisted, On those worlds, the Great Crusade revealed its other face. War, when it came, was swift and absolute. The Imperium did not wage war for conquest alone, but for unity, and unity permitted no division. Armies descended from orbit in disciplined waves, their advance guided by strategies calculated long before the first shot was fired. Resistance, no matter how fierce, could not endure indefinitely against such precision. Yet even in war, there existed a sense of inevitability rather than cruelty. The Imperium did not see itself as a destroyer, but as a restorer. Across the expanding frontier, the Emperor's presence was rarely witnessed directly. He did not stand upon every battlefield, nor did he speak to every newly compliant world. Instead, his will moved through intermediaries, through commanders and generals whose authority derived entirely from him. Among these figures were beings who stood apart from all others. They were not merely leaders. They were something greater. Forged through means that few could comprehend, they carried within them the Emperor's design in its purest form. Each one embodied an aspect of his vision, expressed not in words, but in action. They walked among ordinary soldiers as distant giants, their presence both inspiring and unsettling. To look upon one was to witness humanity made more than human. Where they led, victory followed. The armies of the Imperium advanced with a confidence that bordered upon certainty. They had known the darkness of isolation. They had seen the cost of division. Now, united beneath a single purpose, they believed themselves unstoppable. Across the fleets, among the countless soldiers who would never stand in the Emperor's presence, faith in his vision became a quiet constant. They did not question the direction of the crusade. They did not question its necessity. They believed. In the void between stars, the Imperium's vessels traveled in vast formations, their engines burning with steady brilliance. Within their hulls, generations of warriors lived and died, their lives measured not in years, but in campaigns. To them, the crusade was not an event, but a reality as permanent as the stars themselves. Some would never see terror. Some had never known any world but the decks of their ships. And yet they understood their purpose. They were the hands of something greater than themselves. Far above them all, beyond the reach of ordinary perception, the Emperor watched. His attention was not limited to a single fleet or a single war. His vision encompassed the entirety of humanity's future. He saw not only what was, but what might yet be. Every decision, every campaign, every world brought into compliance was a step toward a destination only he fully understood. He did not explain this destination. He did not need to. Those who served him trusted in its existence. On distant worlds newly brought into the Imperium, the first changes were often subtle. Symbols appeared where none had existed before. New structures rose beside ancient ones. The languages of isolated cultures began to shift, shaped by contact with a wider Imperium. Over time, these worlds became part of something larger than themselves. They were no longer alone. For the first time in uncounted millennia, humanity was becoming whole again. And in this age of expansion, there was no sign of an ending. Each victory led to another horizon. Each horizon revealed new stars waiting to be claimed. The crusade moved forward with a quiet momentum of inevitability, driven by a certainty that seemed unshakable. Yet beneath this certainty, beyond the reach of fleets and armies, there remained truths that few could see. The galaxy was vast. Its silence was not always empty. There were forces older than humanity's memory, watching as the Imperium spread outward from its ancient cradle. They did not announce themselves. They did not interfere. Not yet. But their presence lingered, like distant thunder beyond the edge of hearing. Still, the Imperium advanced. Its banners carried into the darkness, its purpose unbroken, and at the center of it all, distant and enduring, the Emperor remained upon Terra, guiding the destiny of his species with a patience that seemed beyond time itself. In those early years, there was confidence, there was unity, there was belief that the future belonged entirely to mankind. And as the fleets continued their silent passage between the stars, and as countless worlds felt the first touch of reunion, there existed the quiet sense that this was only the beginning of a story far greater than any single victory. As the Great Crusade continued its steady expansion into the silent reaches of the galaxy, there emerged among the Emperor's generals one whose presence seemed to carry a particular gravity, as though the currents of history themselves bent gently around his path. He was not the first of the Emperor's sons to be found, nor the last, but there was something in him that resonated deeply with the purpose of the crusade. Those who stood in his presence often struggled to explain the certainty he inspired. It was not born of fear, nor enforced through distance, but drawn instead from a sense of belonging, as if he represented not only authority, but the fulfillment of an ancient promise. He moved among warriors without hesitation, speaking to them not as distant instruments, but as extensions of a shared destiny. In his voice there was clarity, and in his actions there was a calm assurance that endured even in the uncertain hours before battle. Where doubt lingered, it diminished in his presence. The fleets under his command advanced with quiet precision. Each world brought into compliance became another point of light in a widening constellation of unity. His victories were not reckless. They were deliberate, measured, and complete. To those who observed from afar, he appeared as both commander and symbol. To the Emperor, he was something more. Though the Emperor remained upon Terra for much of this era, there were moments when he walked beside his son among the stars. In those rare instances, the distinction between ruler and heir became something almost intangible, defined not by hierarchy alone, but by a shared understanding that required no words. They did not speak as strangers. They spoke as beings shaped by the same purpose. In council chambers illuminated by cold starlight, they studied the unfolding map of humanity's rebirth. Each newly reclaimed system represented not only a victory, but a responsibility. The Imperium was not merely expanding. It was awakening. The Emperor's son understood this burden. He did not question it. He accepted it as naturally as breath. Among the countless soldiers who served beneath him, loyalty was not demanded. It formed on its own, growing stronger with each campaign. They saw in him the reflection of the Emperor's were made manifest, not distant and unknowable, but present and enduring. Even in the void, where distance could diminish certainty, his presence remained constant. He was there at the forefront of the Crusade's advance, guiding its momentum, watching, learning, becoming. Yet there were moments when he stood alone, apart from the endless motion of fleets and armies. In those quiet intervals, he would look outward into the unbroken darkness between stars, as though searching for something beyond the reach of sight. No words were spoken in those moments. No orders were given. Only silence endured. It was in such silence that the weight of destiny could be felt most clearly. The Imperium believed itself ascendant, its future secured through unity and strength. Its leaders, shaped by the Emperor's vision, carried forward without hesitation. They did not see themselves as fragile. They saw themselves as inevitable. And at the center of that certainty stood the Emperor's chosen son. He did not stand above humanity. He stood before it, leading it forward. With each passing year, his legend grew, carried from world to world by those who had witnessed his presence. Stories spread not through proclamation, but through memory, carried in the voices of those who believed they had seen the future taking shape before their eyes. He did not seek such legend. It formed around him nonetheless. Far away, upon Terra, the Emperor continued his unseen work, guiding the Imperium through means few could fully comprehend. His attention remained vast, encompassing more than any single war. Yet still, he watched. He watched his son. He watched the unfolding of something that had been set in motion long before the first fleets departed Terra's orbit. And in the quiet passage of time, as the Crusade advanced deeper into the unknown, there existed a growing sense that this bond, forged in purpose and trust, would one day be tested by forces neither could yet see. For now, there was only progress, only the steady advance of unity across the stars, only the enduring presence of the one who carried the Emperor's will into the darkness, and whose return, in a distant and uncertain future, would remind humanity of the strength it had once possessed. And in the endless night between distant suns, where silence reigned without end, his fleets continued forward, bearing with them the fragile, luminous hope of an empire still in its first and most certain dawn. There were those among the fleets who believed they were witnessing the shaping of something eternal, though they could not have explained why. They felt it in the stillness before translation into the hidden currents, and in the steady glow of distant stars emerging once more into view. It was not triumph alone that defined those moments, but continuity, the sense that humanity had resumed a journey interrupted long ago. In that continuity lived trust, and in that trust lived patience, and in that patience lived the quiet certainty that the path ahead, though unseen, remained guided by will that did not falter or fade into darkness beyond stars. As the Great Crusade extended its light into the distant reaches of the galaxy, There were regions long untouched by humanity's hand that began to stir beneath its influence. These were worlds of quiet histories, where civilizations had endured in isolation, shaped by environments and struggles wholly unknown to terror. For countless generations, these planets had existed in solitude, their people and creatures developing paths entirely their own, unaware of a larger order waiting beyond the stars. When the fleets first approached these lost worlds, the sight was often bewildering. Many had not observed other human settlements for centuries. Their societies were intricate, shaped by isolation, yet vulnerable to forces beyond their comprehension. Some welcomed the Imperium as liberators, perceiving in the distant banners a promise of protection and knowledge long denied. Others met them with caution, seeing strangers arriving from the void as potential conquerors, whose motives were unknowable and whose strength could not be measured. On the bridge of his flagship, the Emperor's son regarded each new system with calm assessment. He did not rush to judgment, nor did he act in haste. His approach was deliberate, measured by a combination of strategy, empathy, and the quiet understanding that the Imperium's expansion was not simply conquest, but restoration. He recognized that these worlds carried not only material resources, but stories, cultures, and histories that, when guided with care, could strengthen the Imperium's tapestry rather than erode it. In many cases, initial contact was ceremonial rather than martial. Envoys and intermediaries were dispatched to speak on behalf of the Emperor's will, conveying the certainty of unity while respecting the autonomy of local leadership wherever possible. Even amid this diplomacy, the shadow of the Imperium's power was evident. It was a presence both protective and inexorable, offering opportunity while making clear the costs of resistance. When resistance did arise, it was met with swift and precise measures. The Imperium's forces were unmatched in both discipline and technology, yet the son of the Emperor always sought to limit unnecessary destruction. Battle was a tool of necessity, not of pleasure, and the aftermath was carefully managed to rebuild and integrate rather than annihilate. Cities, infrastructure, and traditions were preserved wherever feasible, tempered by the understanding that some systems required guidance to reach their potential. This balance of authority and restraint became a hallmark of his campaigns, a reflection of the Emperor's own distant wisdom. Across these newly awakened worlds, humanity began to perceive itself not as scattered fragments, but as part of a vast, interlinked whole. Communication and travel, once slow and treacherous, became efficient and reliable. Trade routes, knowledge exchanges, and coordinated defense networks emerged, forming the foundation of a galaxy-spanning civilization. Where once isolation had bred fear and superstition, it now gave way to confidence and aspiration. For many, the presence of the Imperium was a reassurance that the stars themselves could be claimed, mapped, and understood. The son of the Emperor did not seek accolades for these achievements. His satisfaction was quiet, almost imperceptible. He measured success not in the adulation of crowds or in the naming of cities after his victories, but in the gradual, almost imperceptible change in the hearts and minds of those he guided. Unity, he understood, was cultivated, not imposed. And when trust formed, it endured far beyond any individual campaign. Yet even as the Imperium extended its reach, there were shadows upon the edges of perception. Among the stars, there existed ancient forces that had observed humanity in secret, entities older than memory, whose motives were inscrutable. Their presence was subtle, often manifesting as unease or fleeting glimpses of phenomena beyond natural explanation. Though they did not interfere directly, their existence served as a reminder that the galaxy was neither empty nor entirely benign. Humanity's triumphs, though formidable, were not absolute. Vigilance was required even amid the most confident of advances. Within this context, the Emperor's son continued to guide the fleets with patience. His leadership was marked by foresight, anticipating challenges before they emerged and ensuring that the Crusade's momentum remained unbroken. Every campaign, every integration of a lost world, was another step in a larger pattern whose end was unseen, yet whose design was unquestionable to those who followed him. In his calm demeanor, the soldiers found reassurance. In his unwavering focus, they discovered purpose. As more worlds joined the Imperium, the fabric of humanity grew richer. Cultures intertwined, languages spread, and knowledge once thought lost began to return. Artifacts of old civilizations were preserved, studied, and respected, their lessons informing the future without erasing the past. The crusade was not merely expansion, it was a careful weaving of countless threads into a single, coherent design, each world contributing to the strength and resilience of the whole. And yet, in the quiet moment between campaigns, the son of the Emperor would gaze outward from his flagship, past the glow of distant suns, and contemplate the vastness yet unexplored. There remained untold systems, untapped potential, and dangers unseen. The galaxy was immense, and humanity's grasp upon it was still young. But within that immensity, he sensed a growing alignment, a harmony between purpose and action, as if the stars themselves were yielding to the persistent will of the Imperium. He understood that this harmony was fragile, that it required care and patience to maintain. Each world, each people, each victory was a note in an unfolding symphony, delicate yet enduring. The Emperor's distant guidance was always present, a subtle influence shaping decisions and outcomes beyond immediate perception. And through it all, his son acted as a visible embodiment of that will, carrying its authority across light years with quiet certainty. In the stillness of the void, amidst fleets moving like slow, deliberate constellations, the Imperium's presence became a comforting constant. Soldiers aboard their vessels, civilians on newly incorporated worlds, and leaders guiding systems all came to recognize a singular truth. Humanity was awakening from its long isolation, and its path forward was being shaped by hands both seen and unseen, by guidance patient and unwavering. As the crusade pressed onward, the galaxy slowly shifted. The lost worlds, once isolated and vulnerable, were becoming aware of their place within something greater. They were no longer fragments cast across the void. They were part of a living, expanding organism, resilient yet adaptable, capable of enduring beyond the limits of imagination. And in the quiet hour before the next campaign, as distant stars cast gentle light across the decks of countless ships, the son of the Emperor reflected upon what had been achieved. The Imperium's reach was growing, its influence spreading, and somewhere beyond sight, the distant presence of the Emperor remained, guiding, observing, shaping the future with a patience that spanned millennia. For now, the galaxy was awakening. Humanity was reclaiming its place among the stars. And in the gentle unfolding of this vast, deliberate story, there existed a sense of peace, of inevitability, and a trust in the path that lay ahead, awaiting the next chapter in the history of an empire reborn. In the years that followed the awakening of many lost worlds, there came a period of deeper understanding between the Emperor and the son who carried his authority across the expanding stars. Though distance often separated them, their connection endured beyond the limits of physical presence. Messages traveled along secure channels, encoded within the vast machinery of the Imperium, bearing not only strategic instruction but the quiet reinforcement of shared purpose. These communications were few, yet each carried immense weight, shaping decisions that would influence the course of entire sectors and the countless lives that existed within them altogether. On rare occasions, the Emperor chose to walk among the fleets once more, his arrival transforming the atmosphere of armadas without a single proclamation. Warriors who had faced countless battles found themselves standing in silent attention, not compelled by command, but by instinctive recognition of his presence. He did not linger unnecessarily, nor did he offer grand declarations. Instead, he observed. His gaze moved across command decks and observation galleries, measuring not only the readiness of ships, but the resolve of those who served within them. In these moments, the Imperium itself seemed to pause, as if acknowledging its origin. The son stood beside him during such visits, neither speaking unnecessarily nor seeking affirmation. There existed between them an understanding shaped long before the crusade began, forged in intention rather than experience. They regarded star maps together, tracing routes that extended beyond the current frontier, contemplating futures that remained invisible to others. The Emperor's presence did not diminish his son's authority. It refined it, sharpening perception and reinforcing certainty. Those who witnessed them together sensed a convergence of past and future in a single moment, as though the Imperium's destiny rested quietly within their shared silence and mutual, enduring trust. Beyond these moments of proximity, the crusade continued its relentless motion. Fleets departed compliant systems even as others arrived, maintaining a rhythm that never ceased. The son carried the Emperor's confidence with him, not as a burden, but as a steady foundation upon which all action rested. His commanders recognized this certainty, and it became reflected in their conduct. Hesitation diminished. Coordination improved. Each campaign unfolded with greater efficiency than the last. It was not merely experience that produced this change, but the gradual alignment of countless individuals toward a unified, unwavering direction that seemed guided by invisible, patient design. There were instances when entire populations gathered simply to witness his arrival, the anticipation carried in the stillness of crowds. He did not encourage ceremony, yet he understood its meaning. To these people, he was more than a commander. He was proof that humanity had not been abandoned to isolation. When he spoke, his words were measured, chosen not for grandeur, but for clarity. He spoke of unity, of shared responsibility, and of a future shaped by effort. In listening, they began to see themselves not as survivors of separate histories, but as participants in something enduring and immeasurably vast. Yet he never allowed himself to become defined by reverence. In private reflection, he remained aware of the distance still left to travel. The Imperium, though expanding, was not yet complete. There were regions untouched, questions unanswered, and challenges unimagined. He considered these realities without unease. They were not obstacles, but inevitabilities. Progress required patience, and patience required strength. In this understanding, he found equilibrium. He did not rush forward blindly, nor did he linger in comfort. Instead, he maintained the steady pace that had carried the crusade this far, trusting that its course remained true always and forever ahead. Among his closest captains, there grew a quiet awareness that they were witnessing more than military success. They were witnessing the shaping of an era whose consequences would extend beyond their lifetimes. They saw it in the stability of newly integrated worlds, and in the confidence of soldiers who no longer feared the unknown. The crusade was becoming something permanent. Its momentum no longer depended upon fragile beginnings. It had achieved continuity, and at its center stood the Emperor's son, not as a conqueror alone, but as a guardian of a future still emerging from uncertainty and quiet watchfulness attainable. In the vast silence between campaigns, he often walked the observation holes of his flagship alone. Beyond the transparent barriers, the stars shone with indifferent brilliance, ancient and enduring. He studied them without distraction, aware that each light represented both destination and responsibility. Somewhere among them lay challenges not yet revealed, and answers not yet understood. He did not fear what awaited discovery. He accepted it, as he accepted all things, with calm readiness. For he knew that he did not walk this path in isolation, but as part of a design conceived long before his first breath was inevitable. And as the fleets prepared for their next advance, and as countless souls rested within the quiet safety of Imperial protection, there remained a sense of continuity that could not be broken. The Emperor watched from afar. His son carried the mission forward. Between them existed an unspoken certainty that the future, though unwritten, was already moving toward its appointed form. In that certainty there was calm, and in that calm there was strength. The Imperium endured, and under its expanding light, humanity continued its long, patient journey toward a destiny waiting beyond the silent horizon of eternity forever ahead. The Primarch who returned when humanity needed him most. Chapter 5. The Quiet Shape of Loyalty. As the Imperium extended its presence deeper into the galaxy, loyalty became its most essential foundation, more enduring than fleets or fortifications, more resilient than any material structure shaped by human hands. It was not a force that could be manufactured or imposed in its purest form. It grew instead through shared purpose, through the slow accumulation of trust between those who led and those who followed, and through the belief that every sacrifice served something greater than the moment in which it was given freely. The Emperor understood this truth long before the crusade began. His vision did not rely solely upon conquest, but upon the creation of bonds that would persist even in his absence. To this end, his sons were not merely commanders of armies. They were living symbols of continuity, bridges between his distant authority and the countless individuals who would never stand in his presence. Through them, his will became something tangible, something that could be seen and understood within the limits of mortal perception and human endurance across expanding time and distance. Among these sons, the one who had come to embody the forward momentum of the crusade carried this responsibility with quiet awareness. He did not speak of loyalty as an obligation. He demonstrated it through action, through consistency, and through the certainty that he would never ask of others what he would not endure himself. This example spread outward, carried in the observations of those who served near him, and from them to others across the fleets and worlds of the Imperium. In this way, loyalty ceased to be a command. It became a reflection, repeated endlessly across the growing expanse of humanity's domain without weakening. Within the vast warships that moved between the stars, this loyalty took on a deeply personal dimension. Soldiers who had never seen terror still spoke of it with reverence, not as a place, but as an origin that united them. They served beside comrades born on distant and unfamiliar worlds, bound together not by shared history, but by shared future. Differences that might once have divided them faded in the presence of a greater identity. They had become citizens of something immeasurably larger than themselves, participants in a design whose scale exceeded individual understanding yet remained deeply felt within their hearts and minds alike. The Emperor's son recognized the fragility inherent in such unity. Loyalty, once broken, could not easily be restored to its original strength. It required constant care, constant demonstration of its value. For this reason, he remained present among his warriors whenever possible, ensuring that distance did not erode the trust they had placed in him. His presence reassured them, not through grand gestures, but through quiet consistency. He listened, he observed, he remembered. These acts, though small in isolation, accumulated into something enduring, reinforcing the invisible structure that held the Imperium together across immeasurable and silent cosmic distances. There were moments when he sensed the immense weight of expectation resting upon him. Entire fleets moved at his command. Entire worlds reshaped their futures in response to his decisions. Yet he did not allow this awareness to alter his conduct. He understood that authority was not sustained by recognition alone. It was sustained by responsibility, by the willingness to carry burdens without allowing them to distort judgment or purpose. In this discipline, he mirrored the Emperor, whose distant guidance remained steady, even as the Imperium expanded beyond any boundary previously imagined by human thought or memory alone. Across newly compliant systems, populations began to internalize the presence of imperial authority as something natural rather than imposed. Symbols of unity appeared not as reminders of conquest, but as assurances of belonging. Trade flourished. Communication strengthened. Worlds that had once existed in fearful isolation now looked outward with confidence. The Imperium had become not merely a force that arrived from the stars, but a structure within which humanity could envision permanence and stability, even amid the uncertainties of an immense and ancient galaxy waiting beyond their understanding and fragile mortal reach. Yet within the quiet chambers of his flagship, the Emperor's son remained mindful that loyalty flowed in more than one direction. Just as his warriors trusted him, he trusted them. He relied upon their strength, their endurance, and their belief. This mutual dependence formed the true foundation of the Crusade's success. Without it, no fleet could endure, no campaign could succeed, and no vision could be realized. It was this balance, this exchange of faith between leader and follower, that transformed the Imperium from a mere empire into something approaching permanence and meaning beyond immediate survival alone. In the stillness between campaigns, when the endless motion of war briefly subsided, he would reflect upon the countless individuals whose lives intersected with his own. Most would never be remembered beyond their immediate circles. Their names would fade. Their stories would dissolve into the passage of time. Yet their contributions would endure within the Imperium they had helped to build. This understanding brought him neither sorrow nor pride, but acceptance. It was the nature of all great endeavors to be shaped by many hands, even when only a few stood visible at their forefront across the endless and silent reaches of eternity. As the fleets prepared once more to depart into the unknown, loyalty moved with them, invisible yet unbreakable, carried within every soul who served. It required no proclamation. It needed no reinforcement. It existed because it had been known, because it had been proven, and because it had become inseparable from the identity of the Imperium itself. And in the quiet certainty of that truth, beneath the distant and watchful stars, the Emperor's son continued forward, sustained by the unspoken bond that united him with all humanity, and with a future they were creating together in silence. Beyond the growing borders of the Imperium lay distances so vast that even the most disciplined mind struggled to comprehend their scale. These were regions where the light of human civilization had not yet reached, where silence reigned without interruption, and where the passage of time seemed to stretch without measure. It was into this immense quiet that the fleets of the Great Crusade continued their patient advance, carrying with them the fragile continuity of humanity's renewed existence and shared purpose across darkness without end or familiar guidance. Within the great vessels that moved through these endless expanses, life unfolded in carefully maintained balance. Generations lived and served within walls of steel and light, their routines shaped by duty and the steady rhythm of travel between distant systems. They learned to measure time not by planetary cycles, but by the sequence of journeys completed and destinations reached. For many, the concept of a fixed home became abstract, replaced by the understanding that their true place existed wherever the Imperium required their presence at any given moment. The Emperor's son understood this existence intimately. Though he could have remained distant, issuing command from secure isolation, he chose instead to remain among the fleets. He walked their corridors, observed their operations, and listened to the voices of those who served. He recognized that distance, if left unaddressed, could erode unity as surely as any external threat. His presence served as a constant reminder that they were not forgotten, that their efforts were seen and valued within the vast machinery of imperial expansion and enduring human purpose across silent, watchful eternity. In the observation chambers of his flagship, he often stood without movement, watching as the stars shifted slowly beyond the transparent barriers. Each point of light represented both promise and uncertainty, destinations that would one day become part of the Imperium's growing structure. He did not see them as objects to be claimed, but as responsibilities waiting to be fulfilled. The crusade was not driven by hunger for possession, but by the necessity of reconnect Ion. Humanity, once divided beyond recovery, was being made whole again, one distant system at a time through patience and unwavering intent. Communication across such distances required extraordinary effort. Messages traveled through hidden channels, carried by methods refined through long study and careful preservation. Even so, delay was inevitable. Decisions often had to be made without immediate guidance, relying upon judgment shaped by the Emperor's original intent. The son bore this responsibility without hesitation. He did not seek constant reassurance. He trusted in the clarity of purpose that had been instilled within him, and in the knowledge that he acted as an extension of a design far greater than himself alone. There were moments when entire fleets paused at the threshold of unexplored regions, their advance slowed not by fear, but by preparation. Each new step required understanding. Unknown systems could harbor dangers beyond anticipation, environments hostile to human survival, or civilizations shaped by paths entirely separate from Terra's influence. The Imperium approached these encounters with measured caution, balancing readiness for conflict with openness to peaceful integration. This discipline ensured that expansion did not descend into chaos, but remained aligned with the principles upon which the Crusade had been founded since its first departure from ancient Terra. Among the countless individuals who served within these fleets, there existed a shared awareness of the distance they had traveled, and of the distance that still remained. Some had been born during the earliest campaigns and had grown to maturity knowing nothing but the Crusade. Others had joined more recently, drawn by the promise of purpose and belonging. Together, they formed a continuity that transcended individual lifespans. The Imperium endured not because of any single generation, but because each accepted its place within an unbroken chain extending forward into unseen centuries and forgotten ages yet to come. The Emperor, though far removed upon Terra, remained a constant presence within their thoughts. His physical absence did not diminish his authority. If anything, it strengthened it, allowing his vision to exist beyond the limitations of proximity. His son carried that vision outward, ensuring that it remained intact even as distance grew. In this relationship, separation did not weaken unity. It refined it, transforming physical absence into a deeper form of connection rooted in shared intention and mutual understanding across infinite silence and endless unfolding time itself. Yet the son was not untouched by the weight of this responsibility. In the quiet moments between decisions, he reflected upon the magnitude of what was being attempted. Humanity sought not merely to survive, but to define its place within a galaxy that had existed long before its arrival. This ambition required patience beyond ordinary comprehension. It required endurance without certainty of completion. And yet he did not doubt. Doubt had no place within the steady progression of the Crusade. There was only the path forward, illuminated by purpose and sustained by belief in eventual unity. As the fleets resumed their advance, engines burning with controlled brilliance against the endless dark, there remained profound stillness beneath their motion. It was a stillness of inevitability, the quiet certainty that humanity's journey, once begun anew, would not falter. Across unimaginable distances, beneath stars that had witnessed countless ages before the Imperium's rise, the Emperor's son continued to lead. And in the silence between those distant lights, the future waited, patient and unmoving, ready to receive whatever shape humanity would give it in the fullness of time. Though the Emperor remained upon Terra, far removed from the distant edges of the Crusade, his presence endured in ways that required no physical form. It lived within the structure of command, within the certainty of decisions shaped by his design, and within the quiet faith of those who served beneath his distant gaze. Across countless fleets and worlds, his influence moved like an unseen current, steady and unbroken, guiding humanity forward through the immense and silent ocean of the stars with patience beyond mortal understanding or limitation. The Emperor's son felt this presence not as a voice, nor as a command spoken in words, but as a clarity that emerged in moments of decision. When uncertainty arose, he did not hesitate. The path forward revealed itself through reason and purpose, shaped by the principles instilled within him long before the Crusade had begun. This clarity did not remove the burden of choice, but it ensured that choice remained aligned with the greater design. In this way, distance did not separate father and son. It refined the bond between them into something enduring and absolute beyond measure. Across the Imperium's expanding frontier, this unseen guidance became reflected in the conduct of all who served. Commanders who had never stood upon Terra still carried out their duties with confidence, trusting that they acted within a structure that extended beyond their immediate perception. They understood their place within a vast continuum, their actions contributing to a future they might never witness. This understanding did not diminish their resolve. It strengthened it, granting meaning to sacrifices that might otherwise have seemed isolated or without lasting purpose in endless darkness and silence. There were worlds where the Emperor's presence was known only through symbol and memory. Upon these planets, monuments rose in quiet reverence, not as object of worship, but as reminders of unity regained. Citizens lived their lives beneath the protection of imperial authority, their existence shaped by a stability unknown for countless generations. They did not see the Emperor, yet they felt the results of his vision in the order that surrounded them. Peace, once fragile and uncertain, became a lasting condition sustained through vigilance and collective responsibility across generations yet unborn and unimagined. The Emperor's son observed these changes with thoughtful awareness. He understood that the Imperium was becoming more than a force of expansion. It was becoming a structure capable of enduring beyond the lifetime of its creators. This realization brought neither pride nor hesitation. It brought acceptance. The Crusade had never been intended as a temporary endeavor. It was a foundation of a future that would extend across centuries, shaped by those who would inherit its purpose and continue its progression beyond the horizon of present memory and individual mortal existence itself. Yet even as ability grew, he remained watchful. The galaxy was vast beyond measure, and its silence held mysteries not yet revealed. There were regions where signals faded without explanation, and places where the fabric of reality itself seemed to shift in subtle, incomprehensible ways. These phenomena did not halt the Crusade, but they served as reminders that humanity's understanding remained incomplete. Vigilance, therefore, was not a temporary necessity. It was a permanent condition of survival within a universe older and more complex than any human mind could fully grasp or comprehend entirely. Within the fleets, the Emperor's influence remained present in ritual and discipline. Every action, every command, carried the imprint of the structure he had created. Soldiers prepared themselves not only through training, but through reflection upon the purpose they served. They did not see themselves as isolated individuals. They saw themselves as participants in a continuity that stretched backward to terror and forward into an unseen future. This awareness granted them strength, allowing them to endure hardships that would otherwise have broken lesser resolve in quieter, more uncertain ages long forgotten. The son moved among them not as a distant overseer, but as a living extension of the Emperor's will. His presence reinforced a unity that bound them together. He did not demand devotion. He inspired it through consistency, through the quiet certainty of his actions, and through the knowledge that he shared in the burdens they carried. This mutual recognition formed the true strength of the Imperium, a bond that could not be measured in weapons or fleets alone, but in the unspoken trust that connected countless lives across immeasurable and silent interstellar distance. There were moments, in the quiet hours before the next advance, when he reflected upon the Emperor's enduring watchfulness. Though separated by unimaginable space, he did not feel alone. He understood that he was part of something continuous, something that extended beyond the boundaries of individual existence. The Emperor's vision was not confined to a single place or moment. It existed everywhere the Imperium endured, carried forward through those who believed in its necessity and its promise of unity restored across infinite cosmic silence and patience, unfolding eternity itself. As the fleets prepared once more to move beyond the known frontier, their engines awakening with steady and measured power, the Emperor's unseen presence remained with them. It existed in their purpose, in their discipline, and in their unwavering advance into the darkness. The galaxy remained vast and uncertain, but humanity no longer faced it alone. Guided by a will that did not falter, and led by the one who carried that will among the stars, the Imperium continued forward, its future unfolding in silence beneath the eternal and watchful light of distant sun forever. There came a time, as the crusade extended further into the unseen reaches of the galaxy, when the nature of leadership revealed itself not in moments of triumph, but in moments of stillness. It was within these quiet intervals, between the movement of fleets and the integration of distant worlds, that the full weight of responsibility settled upon the Emperor's son. Victory, though constant, did not diminish the gravity of his purpose. Each success expanded the Imperium, and with that expansion came an ever-growing network of lives dependent upon decisions made far from their sight across immeasurable and silent interstellar distance. He did not speak of this burden. To those who served beneath him, he remained unchanged. His voice retained its calm certainty. His presence remained steady and unshaken. Yet within the quiet spaces of his own thought, he understood the magnitude of what had been entrusted to him. Entire civilizations now existed within the framework he helped sustain. Their stability, their safety, and their future were bound to the continuation of the crusade. This awareness did not inspire fear. It inspired vigilance. For he knew that leadership was not measured by authority alone, but by endurance without faltering or surrender. From the highest observation decks of his flagship, he watched the Imperium move as a living structure. Fleets departed and arrived in carefully measured sequence. Messages flowed across the vast distances, carrying information that shaped the decisions of countless commanders. Worlds once isolated now contributed to a greater whole, their resources and knowledge strengthening the Imperium's foundation. This movement, though vast beyond comprehension, maintained a coherence through discipline and shared purpose, sustained by those who believed in its necessity and its promise of lasting unity among humanity's scattered and recovering civilizations everywhere. There were times when he observed the soldiers under his command as they prepared for the next stage of their journey. They moved with quiet efficiency, their actions shaped by training and experience. Many had served for years without pause, their lives defined entirely by the crusade progression. They did not question their role. They accepted it, understanding that their service contributed to something enduring beyond their individual existence. In their discipline, he saw the reflection of the Emperor's original vision, carried forward through countless hands and minds united in singular purpose. Yet he also understood their fragility. They were mortal. Their strength, though remarkable, was finite. They relied upon structure, upon guidance, and upon the certainty that their sacrifices held meaning. It was his responsibility to ensure that this certainty never faltered. He could not allow doubt to take root, for doubt had the power to weaken unity more effectively than any external force. Thus, he carried himself with unwavering composure, ensuring that those who looked to him saw only clarity, only purpose, only the continuation of the path they had committed themselves to follow without hesitation or regret. The Emperor, distant upon Terra, remained the origin of that path. Though separated by unimaginable distance, his influence endured within every aspect of the Imperium's existence. The sun did not require constant communication to feel its presence. It existed within him, embedded in the choices he made and the direction he maintained. He understood that he was not alone in his responsibility. He was part of a continuum that extended beyond individual perception, a structure designed to endure beyond the limits of any single lifetime across the silent and watchful eternity of the endless stars. There were moments when the crusade paused at the threshold of new discovery, when unknown systems waited in silence before first contact. In these moments, anticipation moved quietly through the fleets. Each new world represented possibility, but also uncertainty. The Imperium could not assume that every encounter would be without resistance or consequence. Preparation, therefore, remained constant. Strategies were formed. Observations were made. Nothing was left to chance. This careful approach ensured that expansion continued not through reckless advance, but through measured and deliberate progression guided by foresight and disciplined restraint always. In his private reflections, the Emperor's son considered the nature of time itself. The Crusade, though vast in its reach, was only the beginning of a greater continuum. The Imperium would outlast those who built it. Others would inherit its structure, shaping its future in ways yet unknown. This understanding did not diminish his resolve. It strengthened it. He did not act for recognition, nor for legacy, but for continuity. His purpose was to ensure that humanity's path remained unbroken, that its future remained possible, and that its unity endured beyond the uncertainties of an ever-changing and ancient galaxy surrounding them. As the fleets resumed their advance, engines awakening with low and steady resonance, he remained at his post, watching the stars shift beyond the hull. Each point of light represented both distance and destination, challenges and responsibilities waiting in silent patience. He accepted them all without hesitation, for he understood that the burden he carried was not his alone. It belonged to the Imperium, to the Emperor, and to humanity itself. And in the quiet certainty of that truth, he continued forward, bearing in silence the weight of a future still unfolding among the stars. As the Imperium advanced ever deeper into the uncharted darkness, there arose a growing awareness among its fleets that they were no longer merely explorers or conquerors, but participants in the shaping of something far more enduring. The Great Crusade had moved beyond its earliest uncertainty. It had found rhythm, continuity, and direction. What had once been fragile had become resilient. What had once been distant had become present. Across the immeasurable gulf of space, humanity was no longer scattered. It was becoming whole again, guided by a design older than memory and carried forward with unbroken resolve and quiet purpose. The Emperor's son stood at the center of this transformation, though he did not see himself as its source. He understood his role as part of a greater structure, a living chain of intention that extended back to Terra and outward into the silent infinity beyond. His authority did not isolate him. It connected him. Every order he gave, every decision he made, was another thread woven into the Imperium's expanding fabric. He did not act for the present alone. He acted for futures he would never see, ensuring their possibility through unwavering and careful action across endless distances. Within the fleets, there was a growing sense of permanence. Ships that had once been instruments of uncertain beginnings had become symbols of stability. Their crews moved with practiced confidence, their duties performed without hesitation. They understood their place within the larger whole. They were not merely traveling through the galaxy. They were reshaping it, restoring humanity's presence in regions long beyond its reach. This understanding gave a service meaning that extended beyond individual survival, anchoring them within a purpose that could not be diminished by distance or time alone. The Imperium itself had begun to change. No longer defined solely by expansion, it was becoming defined by endurance. Worlds brought into compliance no longer existed as isolated victories. They became foundations upon which further growth depended. Infrastructure spread across systems, linking populations that had once lived and died without knowledge of one another. Communication flowed with increasing efficiency. Knowledge, once fragmented and incomplete, began to gather into a collective inheritance shared by all who lived beneath the Imperium's protection and guiding authority among stars. The Emperor remained upon Terra, his presence distant yet absolute. Though he did not walk beside the fleets, his influence endured in every action they undertook. His vision had set the Crusade in motion, and it continued to guide its progression even in his absence. The son carried that vision not as a burden, but as a certainty. He did not question its necessity. He did not doubt its purpose. He understood that he existed to ensure continuation, to act as its instrument until the Imperium reached the stability it had been created to achieve for all mankind. Yet even within this certainty, there remained an awareness of the unknown. The galaxy was vast beyond comprehension. Its silence concealed forces and histories that humanity had yet to encounter. There were regions where light itself seemed diminished, where signals faded and instruments struggled to interpret what lay beyond. These mysteries did not inspire fear within him. They inspired vigilance, for he knew that humanity's survival depended not only upon strength, but upon awareness. The Imperium must never assume that its dominance was complete or its future entirely secure forevermore. In the quiet hours between campaigns, he often reflected upon the Emperor's trust. It was a trust given without condition, without hesitation. It did not demand perfection. It demanded continuation. The Crusade must move forward. Humanity must be united. These truths existed beyond argument. They formed the foundation upon which all else depended. He accepted this responsibility fully, not because it had been imposed upon him, but because it was inseparable from his own existence and reason for being among stars and mortal souls alike. Among those who served beneath him, this certainty became a source of calm. They did not need to understand the full scope of the Emperor's design. It was enough to know that it existed, and that they played their part within it. Their faith was not blind. It was built upon experience, upon the visible transformation of worlds and the steady expansion of Imperial protection. They had seen isolation give way to unity. They had seen uncertainty give way to order. These changes were not abstract. They were real, tangible, and enduring across the silent void between distant suns. The sun understood that such transformation required patience beyond ordinary measure. The Imperium's growth could not be rushed. Each world must be integrated carefully. Each population must be guided with discipline and restraint. To act otherwise would risk weakening the very unity the Crusades sought to create. Thus, he maintained his steady course, neither accelerating beyond control nor slowing without purpose. His leadership became defined by balance, by the ability to sustain momentum without sacrificing stability or clarity in pursuit of humanity's ultimate destiny. As the fleets prepared once more to advance into regions yet untouched by human presence, there existed a quiet sense of inevitability. The crusade would continue. The Imperium would endure. Humanity would reclaim its place among the stars. These truths required no proclamation. They existed within the actions of those who carried them forward, within the steady movement of ships across the endless dark, and within the silent resolve of the one who led them onward into the vast and waiting future that had always belonged to mankind. By the time the crusade had reached the farthest edges yet known to Imperial record, there existed within its structure a sense of continuity so profound that it seemed unbreakable. The fleets moved not as isolated formations, but as parts of a single, living whole. Each vessel carried within it the same purpose, the same direction, and the same quiet certainty that humanity's return to the stars was not temporary, but permanent. What had begun as an effort of restoration had become an enduring state of existence, sustained by discipline and by belief in a future carefully shaped and preserved. The Emperor's son remained at the center of this motion, his presence steady and unchanged despite the passing of years and the immeasurable distances traveled. Time moved differently for him, measured not in personal milestones, but in the expansion of the Imperium itself. Each newly compliant world marked not the end of a journey, but the continuation of one. He did not dwell upon completion, for he understood that such a state did not yet exist. The crusade was not meant to end quickly. It was meant to endure until its purpose had been fully realized across the silent and waiting galaxy beyond. Among the fleets, his presence continued to inspire calm. Commanders who had once relied upon instruction now acted with confident independence, their decisions shaped by the example he had set. They no longer saw themselves as followers alone. They saw themselves as participants in the continuation of the Emperor's vision, entrusted with responsibilities that extended beyond their immediate perception. This evolution did not weaken his authority. It strengthened it, transforming it from something imposed into something shared across countless minds and countless distant stars together. In the quiet observation holes of his flagship, he often stood without movement, watching as the distant light shifted slowly against the darkness. These stars, ancient beyond comprehension, had witnessed a rise and fall of civilizations long before humanity's first steps into the void. Now, they bore witness to its return. He did not see this return as conquest. He saw it as restoration, as the re-establishment of a presence that had once been lost but was now being reclaimed through patience and unwavering resolve carried by those who believed in its necessity. The Emperor remained upon Terra, distant yet never absent. His influence endured in every command structure, every fleet movement, and every world brought into unity. Though his physical form did not stand beside the crusade, his will moved with it, carried outward through the actions of his son and those who served beneath him. This relationship required no constant reinforcement. It existed as a certainty, an unspoken connection that transcended distance and ensured that the Imperium's expansion remained aligned with its original and enduring purpose always. There were moments when newly integrated worlds gazed upon the fleets with quiet wonder, their populations witnessing for the first time the scale of the Imperium to which they now belonged. For them, the arrival of these vessels represented not an ending, but a beginning. Isolation gave way to connection. Uncertainty gave way to structure. They became part of something vast and enduring, something that would outlast individual lives and extend far beyond the limits of their own histories. In this transformation, the Imperium fulfilled its role as both protector and guide for humanity's future. The Emperor's son observed these transitions without seeking recognition. He did not require acknowledgement to understand the significance of what had been achieved. His purpose was not defined by how he was seen, but by what he ensured would endure. He measured success in continuity, in the steady progression of unity across regions once divided beyond recovery. This perspective allowed him to remain unchanged by victory or by the passage of time, anchored always to the greater design he served without hesitation or uncertainty. Yet he remained aware that the Crusade's path extended beyond what could presently be seen. There were still regions untouched, still distances unrevealed, and still mysteries waiting in silence. The Imperium's growth, though vast, was not complete. It existed within a galaxy whose scale defied finality. This awareness did not weaken his resolve. It reinforced it, for he understood that the Imperium was not meant to reach an endpoint, but to endure as a living structure capable of adapting and continuing beyond the limits of any single era or generation forever. Within the fleets, this understanding manifested as quiet confidence. Soldiers and commanders alike carried themselves with a certainty that they were part of something enduring. They no longer questioned whether humanity belonged among the stars. They knew that it did. Their service ensured that this belonging would never again be lost. Through discipline, through unity, and through unwavering commitment, they sustained the Imperium's presence across distances that would once have seemed impossible to cross or comprehend in ages long forgotten. As the fleets prepared once more to move forward, their engines awakening with steady and measured brilliance, the Emperor's son remained where he had always been, at the forefront of humanity's return. He did not look back. His focus remained upon the path ahead, upon the distant lights that awaited integration into the Imperium's growing structure. And in the silent space between those stars, beneath the unchanging gaze of eternity, the light of humanity endured, carried forward by those who would never allow it to fade again into darkness or forgotten memory. The silence did not arrive all at once. It crept forward, slow and deliberate, like a patient predator that understood the value of anticipation. The great corridors, once alive with distant engines and whispered command signals, now carried only the faint hum of systems that no longer served any living purpose. Every step forward felt like a trespass into a memory that did not belong to the present. He walked alone. The weight of his armor no longer felt like protection. It felt like inheritance. Every scar etched into its surface carried the echo of choices made long before he understood their cost. He had once believed that purpose was given, that duty was absolute, that the path ahead was carved by hands greater than his own. Now he understood the truth. The path had always been empty. He had simply been taught not to see the void. The chamber ahead waited, unchanged. Ancient doors, taller than monuments, stood open as if they had been expecting him. Their mechanisms had ceased their protest centuries ago, surrendering to stillness. Beyond them, the light burned with a cold permanence, illuminating the throne that had once anchored the fate of entire civilizations. It did not shine with power anymore. It endured. He stopped at the threshold. For the first time since his awakening, uncertainty found him. It was not fear. Fear belonged to those who could retreat. This was something older, something heavier. It was a realization that answers did not restore what had been lost. They only revealed how much had already been taken. The air was thinner inside. He could hear his own systems compensating, adjusting, refusing to acknowledge the decay that surrounded him. The throne rose before him, vast and silent. He remembered standing here before, though memory did not come as images. It came as weight, as expectation, as the presence of something that had filled every empty space within him and given it meaning. That presence was gone. He stepped closer. Each movement felt slower, as if time itself resisted his approach. He wondered, briefly, whether the resistance came from the world or from himself, whether some fragment of what he had been still understood that crossing this distance would end something that could never be restored. He reached the base of the throne. There was no voice waiting for him, no command, no recognition, only the endless endurance of something that had outlived its creator. He stood there, motionless, listening for a signal that would never come. In the silence, he realized how much of his existence had been shaped by obedience to something he had never truly understood. He had never been asked what he wanted. The thought did not arrive as rebellion. It arrived as clarity. For the first time, the absence of command did not feel like failure. It felt like space. Terrifying, infinite space. Space in which choice could exist. Space in which responsibility could no longer be transferred to something greater. Space in which he could no longer pretend he was only a weapon. He turned away. The act felt irreversible. Behind him, the throne remained exactly as it had been, untouched by his decision. It did not demand his presence. It did not punish his absence. It simply endured, as it always had, indifferent to the passage of those who had once defined themselves by it. The corridor stretched before him again, but it was no longer the same corridor. He could see it now for what it was, not a path created for him, but a path he could choose to walk. The difference was small. The difference was everything. He began to move. Each step carried him farther from the certainty that had defined his existence. Each step carried him deeper into uncertainty. Yet with that uncertainty came something unfamiliar, something fragile. Ownership. He did not know what waited beyond the dying systems and forgotten holes. He did not know whether purpose could exist without command, or whether meaning could survive without design. He only knew that standing still would change nothing. Behind him, the silence remained. Ahead of him, the silence waited. But now, for the first time since his creation, the silence did not feel like emptiness. It felt like possibility. He paused once more before the darkness gave way to distant illumination. Far ahead, through fractured archways and the skeletal remains of forgotten machinery, a faint radiance persisted. It was not strong. It did not command. It simply existed, waiting to be acknowledged by those willing to see it. He understood then that endurance was not defined by permanence alone. It was defined by continuation, by the willingness to step forward even when the meaning of that motion remained uncertain. He carried with him no certainty of success, only memory, only inheritance, only the quiet knowledge that he remained. And that, perhaps, was enough. Without haste, without hesitation, he continued forward into the waiting light, leaving behind the last unquestioned certainty he had ever known, and embracing, at last, the unknown future that had always been waiting for him. Somewhere beyond perception, systems stirred in quiet recognition, not in response to command, but in acknowledgement of presence. The galaxy, vast and indifferent, did not change. Yet with an endless silence, a single will endured, moving forward with patience, carrying humanity's dawn toward whatever waited beyond. He emerged from forgotten corridors into a chamber unlike the others. It was vast, not in the way of grand halls built to inspire awe, but in the way of spaces left unfinished. Its ceiling arched high above, disappearing into shadow. Sections of the structure remained exposed, skeletal frameworks reaching upward as though construction had halted mid-thought. Dust drifted slowly through shafts of pale illumination, caught in the faint glow of distant power sources that had refused to die. He stepped forward, and his footsteps echoed. The sound did not return to him as emptiness. It returned as confirmation. The chamber was not abandoned in the same way as the rest. It felt paused, suspended between what it had been and what it might still become. At its center stood a platform, not a throne, not a control nexus, a foundation. Its surface was bare, marked only by faint geometric impressions that suggested something had once been anchored there, or had been intended to be. He approached it slowly, studying the patterns etched into the material. They were deliberate, precise, designed with intention that had never been fulfilled. He understood immediately. This place had not been built to preserve the past. It had been built to begin something new. He stepped onto the platform. The material beneath his weight did not shift, but the chamber responded. Subtle vibrations traveled through the exposed framework above. Lines of dormant circuitry flickered faintly along the walls, not fully awakening, but recognizing presence, not his identity, his choice. For a long moment, he remained still. The galaxy beyond this structure continued its endless motion. Civilization struggled, endured, collapsed, and rose again beneath distant stars. Humanity persisted, fractured yet alive, guided by echoes of systems that no longer fully functioned. He had once been created to lead that persistence. Then he had been lost. Now he stood here, not summoned, not commanded, but present. The difference mattered. A low resonance began to hum beneath the platform. It was not loud. It did not overwhelm. It felt like the slow awakening of something that had waited patiently, not for a signal from above, but for the arrival of someone willing to stand at its center. He felt no surge of imposed authority, no flood of inherited command, only alignment. The chamber did not seek to control him. It sought to amplify what he chose to bring into it. He closed his eyes. For the first time since his return, he allowed himself to remember not the weight of expectation, but the fragments of humanity he had encountered along his path, the isolated worlds, the distant lights, the quiet endurance of people who had survived not because they were ordered to, but because they refused to surrender their existence to darkness. That was the dawn. Not a single command from a distant throne, not an empire imposed through certainty, but countless acts of continuation. When he opened his eyes, the faint circuitry along the walls brightened, not dramatically, not as a display of power, as confirmation. The platform beneath him began to emit a steady glow. It did not project images. It did not generate instructions. It created a field, subtle, expanding outward through unseen channels embedded within the structure of the chamber and beyond. He understood what it was doing, not broadcasting domination, broadcasting presence. A signal, faint but unwavering, traveling outward into the void, not a declaration of conquest, a declaration of survival. Humanity endures. The message carried no signature, no name, no claim to authority. It was not bound to him alone. It was tied to the simple truth that someone still stood, still chose to continue, still refused to let silence define the future. The resonance strengthened. Across distant systems, dormant receivers might one day stir. Forgotten outposts might register the faint pulse and understand that they were not alone. That somewhere, within the vast indifference of space, a living will had chosen not to retreat into memory. He remained motionless at the platform center. He could leave now. The signal would persist without his constant presence. It had been designed that way, not dependent on a ruler, but initiated by one willing to stand. Yet he did not step away, because this was not about initiating a mechanism. It was about accepting the weight that came with it. To stand here was not to reclaim a throne. It was to accept responsibility without illusion. There would be no perfect restoration, no return to a golden certainty that erased all fracture. The future would be imperfect, chaotic, difficult, but it would be alive. The chamber's light stabilized, settling into a quiet, steady rhythm. The skeletal framework above seemed less incomplete now, less abandoned, not because it had changed physically, but because its purpose had been fulfilled. It had waited for a choice, not a command. He stepped down from the platform. The glow did not fade. The signal continued outward, subtle and persistent. He walked toward the far edge of the chamber, where an opening revealed the vastness beyond. Through it, distant stars burned with indifferent brilliance. They did not acknowledge him. They did not alter their course. And yet, somewhere among them, the faintest pulse now traveled. He did not raise a banner. He did not speak a vow. He simply stood, watching the slow rotation of distant light, understanding that dawn was not a single moment when darkness vanished. It was a quiet decision, repeated endlessly, to face the horizon again. Behind him, the chamber hummed softly, alive with a purpose that did not demand worship or obedience. Ahead of him, the galaxy waited, not for a savior, but for continuation. He turned toward the exit. There would be worlds to find, signals to answer, lives to strengthen not through domination, but through connection. The weight upon him was immense, yet it was chosen. And as he stepped beyond the chamber, leaving behind the platform that now carried humanity's quiet declaration into the void, he did not feel like a weapon reborn. He felt like the first step of a living dawn. The darkness of space was not empty. It had always been full of forgotten systems, drifting wreckage, and the slow pulse of civilizations that had once dared to dream. He moved among it with measured grace, the engines of his vessel whispering faintly beneath him, a rhythm that echoed the heartbeat of the Imperium itself. He did not need to see every star. He did not need to chart every trajectory. He only needed to move forward, and the rest would align with the certainty of persistence. Ahead lay a sector that had resisted integration for centuries. Its worlds were scattered, isolated by gravity wells, radiation belts, and anomalies that made conventional navigation difficult. Tales of their defiance had reached him long before his arrival, whispers of systems whose inhabitants had flourished without contact, creating cultures that were alien yet unmistakably human. Some had rejected the Imperium outright. Others had merely survived by turning inward, refusing the intervention of outside authorities. Either way, they represented opportunity, risk, and a challenge to the very notion of continuity he had sworn to uphold. He studied the maps projected across his command deck. Each world was plotted with meticulous care, its orbital parameters, population density, and available resources catalogued in a silent archive. The records were incomplete. They always were. But gaps in knowledge did not prevent action. They demanded it. The Imperium had always thrived in the absence of certainty. Systems like these required a guiding presence, not to dominate, but to integrate. Not to erase their histories, but to ensure that their existence contributed to the broader tapestry of humanity. He reached for a control panel and activated the long-range probes. They drifted outward, carrying sensors capable of penetrating the thick layers of dust and radiation that clung to these systems. Data returned slowly, fragments of planetary atmospheres, surface compositions, and faint electromagnetic traces of intelligent activity. He absorbed it all without haste, letting patterns emerge over time, letting the signals speak before interpreting them. Patience was as much a weapon as any blade or gun. It revealed truth that aggression could never uncover. The first contact would not be sudden. He did not launch with fanfare, did not herald his arrival with the full might of the fleet behind him. Instead, he moved with discretion, ensuring that the inhabitants would perceive the Imperium not as an invader, but as a presence that had always been silently observing, quietly asserting its influence through consistency rather than spectacle. He understood that fear could enforce compliance, but understanding could endure beyond fear. He chose the world closest to the system's edge first, a rocky planet with a thin atmosphere and cities clustered around geothermal vents. Its inhabitants had adapted to the harsh environment, building their lives in hollowed rock formations and domed settlements. They did not yet recognize the larger galaxy beyond their skies, but they were aware of something moving, something watching. His senses detected subtle energy fluctuations, communications, power usage, and faint traces of technologies that had evolved independently. This was a reality of isolation, human ingenuity, unrefined by external guidance, yet profoundly resilient. He did not land. Not yet. First, he observed. He allowed the patterns of daily life to continue, recording schedules, customs, and the interactions of leadership structures. He identified points of cohesion, places where influence could be introduced subtly, without breaking the natural order. These were not conquests. They were calibrations, the careful tuning of a system so that it could be connected to the greater whole without suffering the trauma of forced assimilation. This was leadership at its quietest, most deliberate, most enduring form. Hours passed, or perhaps days. The measurement of time was fluid aboard a vessel that traversed a void at impossible speeds. Still, he remained patient, analyzing the flow of energy, the rotation of populations, and the subtle signals that indicated readiness for engagement. Then he made the choice. A single vessel detached from the main fleet, cloaked in the faint shimmer of concealment, moving toward the planet's atmosphere. Its descent was precise, calculated, and nearly invisible. Sensors aboard the ship picked up electromagnetic interference that would have caused alarms to less experienced observers. But here, they went unnoticed. The inhabitants continued their routines, unaltered by the imperceptible arrival of the emissary. He allowed the process to unfold without interference, ensuring that the first touch of the Imperium's presence was felt as guidance, not command. When the vessel landed, emissaries, small, unobtrusive, and fully trained, disembarked. They carried no banners, no symbols of authority. Their tools were those of observation and communication, instruments calibrated to translate, record, and facilitate. The inhabitants encountered them with curiosity rather than hostility, wary but unafraid. The first contact had been achieved not through force, but through careful positioning and understanding of human nature in isolation. Back aboard his flagship, he watched from orbit, monitoring every interaction. Patterns shifted subtly as the inhabitants adapted to the new variables introduced by the emissaries. The process would take weeks, months, perhaps years, but it had begun. He did not intervene. He allowed the natural adaptation to unfold. This was a way of the Imperium that endured, not through overwhelming power alone, but through guidance, persistence, and the unyielding application of deliberate influence. As he observed the system, his mind extended outward. Beyond this sector were countless more, worlds that had evaded integration, systems that had grown independently, cultures that had been shaped by isolation and necessity. Each one required the same careful approach, the same balance between influence and respect. The galaxy would never be uniform, and it need not be. Diversity was strength when guided by a purpose beyond immediate gratification. He did not rush. He would never rush. The shadows of space were long, but they could be shaped. They could guide the light of humanity, focus it where it had the greatest chance of enduring. He understood this as clearly as any law etched into the bones of the Imperium. The stars themselves were not indifferent. They were a stage, and the actors were countless, scattered across the darkness. His role was not to dominate the stage, but to ensure the performance continued, uninterrupted, for all who would watch and inherit it. In silence, he set a course for the next world. The fleet adjusted accordingly, engines whispering in unison, a symphony of coordination that spanned light years. The shadows would not define the stars. He would. And as the first light of distant suns struck the hull of his vessel, he understood the truth that had guided him since his return. Patience and persistence shaped destiny more effectively than any weapon ever could. The galaxy was vast, the challenges infinite, but the Imperium endured, not because it demanded obedience, but because it chose to persist quietly, relentlessly, without pause, until every shadow bent to the vision of humanity's continuing light. The void stretched endlessly before him, a canvas both infinite and indifferent, yet alive with whispers of the past and the potential of what could come. Every star was a witness, every planet a repository of memory, and every system a chapter in the ongoing story of humanity's reach. He had traversed countless light years, his presence an unbroken constant among the shifting currents of civilizations rising and falling. Yet with every new world encountered, he remained acutely aware that the history of the galaxy was never truly his command, only to guide, shape, and preserve. Ahead lay a system of singular complexity. Its planets were numerous, but they were bound by harsh orbital mechanics, tidal distortions, and erratic solar flares. One world, in particular, drew his attention, a planet of pale blue oceans and jagged continents, seemingly fragile in the grip of violent storms and unpredictable tectonics. Yet beneath the turbulence, sensors revealed a civilization teetering on the brink of self-realization, capable of extraordinary adaptation. It had developed technologies divergent from those of the Imperium, solutions born from necessity rather than doctrine. Such ingenuity fascinated him. It demanded careful observation before intervention. He lingered in orbit, silent and still, allowing the data streams from probes and long-range scanners to fill the void of uncertainty. He catalogued energy usage patterns, atmospheric composition, communication networks, and population movements. The civilization's development was uneven. Some cities thrived, while others succumbed to environmental hazards, but each demonstrated a spark of ingenuity, a will to endure, and a capacity to understand consequences. He measured time not in hours or days, but in the unfolding of potential, recognizing that premature interference could fracture what had taken generations to evolve. The Imperium's presence had always been strongest where patience tempered power. He had learned that command without understanding was an empty exercise. Influence without patience was fragile. This system, he realized, required more than authority. It required guidance, a subtle and consistent shaping of trajectories without imposing finality. The balance between observation and action was delicate, yet it was a responsibility he carried willingly, fully aware that the lives of millions could pivot on a single decision, and that such decisions must be informed by knowledge, not impulse. He dispatched a contingent of discreet emissaries, small and unassuming, equipped with tools to interface with local communications and observe interactions without disruption. They did not arrive with weapons drawn, banners unfurled, or proclamations of allegiance demanded. Instead, they became part of the daily pattern of the planet's civilizations, integrating carefully, allowing curiosity to bridge the gap between alien and familiar. They were guides, not conquerors. The subtlety of their presence ensured that the people would adapt on their own terms, choosing integration not out of fear, but out of recognition of opportunity and shared destiny. Throughout the process, he remained in orbit, detached yet intimately connected through data streams and careful monitoring. Every shift in energy distribution, every new alignment of infrastructure, every tentative diplomatic gesture was catalogued. He measured progress not by the speed of assimilation, but by the resilience and adaptability demonstrated by the inhabitants. Those who had once survived in isolation were beginning to perceive a larger pattern, the faint outlines of a galaxy wider than their own horizons, and with that perception came choice. Choice, he knew, would cement loyalty far more firmly than any forced decree. The planet's leaders, initially cautious, gradually recognized the presence of the emissaries as benign, even helpful. Small innovations spread between communities as knowledge was shared discreetly, a network forming silently beneath the surface of daily life. He watched this unfold, understanding that the Imperium's strength was not merely in military might, but in the cultivation of cohesion, trust, and sustainable governance. Every lesson he had learned across countless systems informed the methodical shaping of these societies, ensuring continuity without disruption, influence without oppression. Yet he remained vigilant. The galaxy's shadows were never dormant. Threats, both internal and external, could emerge without warning. Pirates exploiting navigational hazards, rogue factions resisting guidance, environmental disasters threatening fragile civilizations. Contingency plans were always active, fleets strategically positioned, reserves ready to intervene, but only when absolutely necessary. His philosophy was simple: allow freedom where possible, exert control where required. This delicate equilibrium had always been the hallmark of enduring governance, and it remained so across the stars. As weeks passed, the civilization began to adopt new frameworks, subtle yet profound, that allowed them to manage resources, mitigate hazards, and expand their knowledge without abandoning cultural identity. The emissaries had not imposed solutions. They had illuminated possibilities. The people now moved toward integration with awareness, not coercion, a process that honored their history while preparing them for inclusion in a larger whole. Observation, patience, and disciplined action had transformed uncertainty into continuity. He considered the galaxy at large. Beyond this system were innumerable others, each unique, each requiring careful management. The sheer scale of potential was daunting, yet he felt no despair. The Imperium endured because its vision was anchored not in transient triumph, but in the persistent, patient shaping of human destiny. Every system integrated thoughtfully, every society guided judiciously, strengthened the Imperium's presence and ensured that humanity would endure long after individual lives, victories, and failures had faded. Finally, he withdrew from orbit, his observation complete, leaving the emissaries embedded within the civilization's networks. The transition had begun, quietly, without fanfare, yet profoundly. He charted a new course for the next system, fully aware that the process would be repeated countless times across countless light years, each iteration reinforcing the Imperium's permanence. In the silence of his flagship, he reflected on the enduring truth that had guided him through every sector. Influence, patience, and deliberate action carried the galaxy forward far more effectively than force, decree, or fleeting conquest. The echoes of his presence would persist in the hearts and minds of those who had been touched, forming a network of resilience and continuity that no distance, hazard, or shadow could sever. The stars themselves seemed to respond, their light steady and unbroken. Across the vast void, the Imperium's vision unfolded with careful inevitability. He alone had witnessed the intricate interplay of freedom and guidance, chaos and order, isolation and integration. And in that knowledge, he found certainty. Humanity would endure, not through domination, but through the steady, relentless shaping of possibility, the echoes of eternity carried forward in the measured steps of those who would always guide it. He set a new trajectory. The work of connection, integration, and careful guidance would continue, unending and precise, for the galaxy was vast, the challenges infinite, and the light of humanity would never falter.